Hey, Amber Vilhauer here, your online business growth expert. And during today's Fast Track video, I want to talk to you about the question that I get a lot of times from our book launch and marketing clients, which is, how do I know what's the best podcast that I should be interviewed on? Now, the reason that entrepreneurs are asking me this question is because the more you start to put yourself out there into the online world and you start gaining some exposure between pre-orders or book sales, you're starting to speak a little bit more. Maybe you're doing live streaming on social media and you're just starting to build some buzz, build some momentum. That's right about the time that you'll start getting inquiries coming in from podcast hosts inviting you to be interviewed on their show. Now, in the beginning, you can say yes to everybody if you want to, right? I mean, the reality is that you're looking to get exposure online in as many channels as you can. Now, the thing that I love about podcasting is that host who really needs somebody awesome to come onto their show to get interviewed has really spent a lot of time building up their community of qualified listeners so that by the time you come on and add some value, you can actually leverage that community to grow your own tribe, right? So it can be a fantastic win-win. Now, there are a lot of good practices and do's and don'ts within this topic, but I want to stay on point with, well, how do I know if this podcast is the right fit for me? In the beginning, you might say yes to everybody, but over time, you will know that some podcasts are going to be a good use of your time and others won't. So here are 4 pieces of criteria that you can use when trying to decide if this is a fit for you. Now, you'll get an email inquiry or perhaps a LinkedIn message. Somebody's going to be reaching out to you asking if you would consider being interviewed on their show. The first thing that I do is I actually go to iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or just the different channels that podcast might be hosted on. And I try to get a sense of the activity. How many reviews does this podcast host have? You know, how many comments? Are they good comments and reviews? I also like to look at the length of time that podcast has been live. So I might see, does the host have 50 published episodes? Do they have 500? I personally start to engage a little bit more with podcasts that have a minimum of 75 episodes underneath their belt. Because basically what I'm trying to determine is this is somebody who's committed. This is somebody who's serious about growing their following and growing an audience of engaged listeners, because that's who I can make the greatest impact for. If you literally just started your podcast last week and you only have 1 review and 2 episodes, that makes me a little bit nervous. Now, in some situations, it can be a positive over the long term because, say, a year from now, when that podcast host has, 180 episodes published, and I'm one of the first, well, when listeners come in, they tend to start around episode 1, then they'll listen to 2 and 3. So there is an argument that my episode could get heard early on in the show. And I would say the vast majority of podcasts die before episode even 30 hits. Because if that podcast host doesn't hit a certain level of momentum, they usually give up, which is such a disappointment, but that's just the law of numbers in terms of starting something online. So you have a little bit of a gamble. There's no hard and fast rule. I just want to provide the education so that you can make the best decision for you. Typically, I try to be on shows that have at least 75 episodes under their belt if I can. And then I'm just looking for general activity and engagement. How frequently are they publishing episodes? Does it really feel like I can rely on this podcast host to continue to grow their show and their following? Because the more serious they are, the more serious I'm excited to be as well. And then everybody wins on an even bigger playing field. So I would say definitely looking at how engaged their following is, and if their following is growing, that's kind of the first criteria that I look at. Another piece of criteria that I look at is, do we share the same audience? Right? So if I'm trying to talk to authors and this person's audience is to lawyers, well, maybe some of those lawyers are also authors, but it's a bit of a stretch. So that may or may not be the best use of my time. Now, if I'm trying to open up into new markets, that's one thing. But otherwise, you just want to be a little bit mindful about the audience that you have. And how can you tell what their audience is? Well, just by doing a bit of research. If you go to their show title, their show notes, their description, looking at their website, getting a sense of what is their mission and who are they ultimately trying to serve, these are all indicators of, do we share the same audience or not? The third criteria that I use is, does it seem like we share the same core values? Right? So there are shows out there that have a bit more of a aggressive or controversial host. Now, there's a time and a place, but Amber's personality is different than that. So would it be a match? Now, if I am trying to stir up some controversy as well and be the light in maybe a dark situation, that's an opportunity to try to convert people over. And if I don't get the sense that the host is willing to play and make it a win-win, then it could be setting me up for failure, which of course I don't want. So you have to kind of decide what's best for you. But I really like to see, is this a personality match? Does it seem like we share the same core values? Because I am rooted in goodness. I want to make a positive impact. And if the show host kind of doesn't have that same approach, then it could make for really awkward conversation, which isn't entertaining for your listeners and could backfire in terms of results. And the last criteria that I look at is how experienced or, again, committed does that podcast host appear to be, especially with experience, because sometimes I've been interviewed on shows where it's like, I don't really know what I'm being asked and nothing is really coming together and it seems like it's not really benefiting anybody. Now, the more shows that host has underneath their belt, the less likely this is. If it's a brand new show, then you can kind of count on this, that they need some time to develop their interviewing skills. Now, because I'm a more experienced interviewee, then I can still take a muddy situation and shape it into something that seems more structured. So even if they're asking me a question that doesn't really make sense or navigates out of left field, I can try to bring it together. And that's why, as an interviewee, you want to make sure that you're doing prep work, preparation going into that podcast so that you have a sense of what your goals are, what your talking points are, any stories that you feel are related to those talking points that you could be sharing. And then since all of that has been figured out in advance, then you can bring in more entertainment value, which is going to make that show much more successful for everybody. So if you found that helpful, I'd love for you to make a comment below and let me know what was a big aha for you or what your criteria is so that other listeners can build upon that so that we're really making sure that we're getting on the right shows. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to get notified when future episodes like this become available. And if you'd like to go deeper into this topic, then I invite you back to ambervilhauer.com, where I have lots of resources around podcasting and marketing and launch that can support your journey. Until the next video, just remember, no guts, no glory.